Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Hi everyone, it's so good to be with you today. Janie and I are in the midst of preparing to leave for a 10-day church history tour. And so she is frantically busy running some last-minute errands. And here I am recording this, and I'm going to guess that by the time you hear it, we'll be somewhere with our group in the middle of Ohio or Illinois or maybe even Missouri. Anyway, we wish all of you well, and we hope you're having a great summer. I love this reminder from President Spencer W. Kimball that the time would come when only those who believe deeply and actively in their families would be able to preserve their families in the midst of the gathering evil around us. So imagine that you're a 12-year-old boy, and what is it that you want to become? Now, years ago, many boys would have probably answered something like Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, or maybe a favorite teacher, or maybe even a grandfather. But today, many boys struggle to answer that question at all. In fact, one recent survey of junior high students asked a very simple question: who's your hero? And the most common answer was none. Now that should concern every parent, grandparent, teacher, coach, and church leader, because boys need heroes. And I'm going to focus on boys a little bit today, but I believe that girls can benefit by this episode as well. Years ago, not too many years ago, a few years ago, I wrote a book called The Making of a Man. That book is found on Amazon today. But one of the chapters was on this idea of heroes. And I was writing the book about raising boys, and so there's probably going to be this emphasis on boys. I hope you don't mind, but I do believe this crosses over. So I do like to say, yes, boys need heroes. They always have and they always will. And today we're going to talk about why heroes matter, where the heroes have gone, and why the most important heroes in a boy's life may not be famous at all. They may be sitting at the dinner table. Now, let me tell you really quick about my hero, or at least my hero when I was a teenager. A man by the name of Freddie Patek was my hero. Now, I don't expect anyone to know that name unless you're listening to this podcast from Kansas City. But Freddie was a professional baseball player for the Kansas City Royals, which happened to be one of my favorite teams as I grew up. I had two favorite teams, the Houston Astros, because I lived in Houston, and my grandfather's favorite team was the Kansas City Royals. And whenever we went to Kansas City with my grandfather, we always went to a Royals game. And so I just came to love the Royals. And I knew every player on on both of those teams, and I could probably go through the whole batting lineup right now. I could tell you who played where. I could even stand and show you the batting stance of every one of those players. But for me, Freddie Patek was just my favorite. He was the smallest player in the major leagues at 5 feet 4 inches tall, and that's about how big I was as I was a sophomore, junior in high school. He had an exceptionally strong arm. He was a lightning fast base stealer. And just everything that I tried to do as a young boy and now teenager playing baseball, now in high school, I just tried to copy everything that Freddie Patek did. He played shortstop. I played second base. He would often run out into the outfield to catch fly balls. I tried to do the same thing. You just couldn't get the ball between second and third base. He would just field any ball. And I just tried to do everything the way he did it. I tried to stand like him. I tried to act like him. I tried to play like he did. In fact, one time, my grandfather told me that an outfielder on the Kansas City Royals named Amos Otis got in a fight and chewed out Freddie Patek for running out into the outfield and catching fly balls. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do that in this game I'm playing in tonight. I'm going to so do that. I'm going to catch a ball in center field from my second base position and see if I can make that player mad. Anyway, I probably took it a little bit too far. But I love that. I just tried to play with his intensity. And in fact, one of my teammates, because I told them about my hero, and they started to call me Patek on my on my baseball team. Anyway, and I loved it. In fact, looking back in my youth, most of my heroes would have been professional athletes. Roger Staubach was a hero of so many and would still be a hero today. Just a great Christian man with Christian values, married with children and now grandchildren. Other players for the Cowboys, I loved Walt Garrison. I loved for the Kansas City Royals, along with Freddie Patek, George Brett. But since those days, it's become increasingly difficult for young boys to find maybe athletes who they can emulate. Professional sports teams have now been plagued with lawsuits and scandals and controversies. Meanwhile, it seems like many contemporary athletes engage in less than wholesome lifestyles. Drugs, alcohol, immorality, just to name a few of those vices. And if modern young men are looking for role models, they may have to look elsewhere today. But now back to Freddie Patek just for a minute. I can't resist, everyone. But I never met him, but I did want to be like him. And that's what heroes do. Heroes have a way of shaping our behavior. We imitate what we admire. In fact, adults do that too. So, yeah, thinking of this idea that we admire, or we become at least what we admire, I think of a quote from President Henry B. Eyring, that when we choose heroes, we begin to copy, consciously or unconsciously, what we admire most in them. There's no question that heroes influence our attitudes. They influence our behavior. Heroes certainly influence our values. Heroes influence aspirations. Go back to values for a second. I remember as a 11th grader in high school, and having a favorite college football player that I'll remain unnamed. But when I learned what that player did in terms of values, or in other words, when I learned that that player really didn't seem to have a lot of values, I just lost interest. I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed in that. I wanted a hero that I could look up to that believed in some things, that stood for some things, and that lived a life a certain way. At least I was hoping with some kind of morals, right? So who are your children's heroes? Grandparents, do you know that question? Who are your grandchildren's heroes? And who are yours? And where now have they gone? That's a great question. You know, historical data is fascinating, and I pulled some of this. I want to give credit to my good friend Randall Wright, who actually quite a few years ago did a lot of work on heroes and their influence on youth. And from some of Randall's research, what he was able to show that in 1900, or at least the 1900s, 78% of heroes came from historical figures. 78%. Lincoln, Washington, those kind of people. 12% came from literary figures, and 10% came from relatives and acquaintances. Then in the 1950s, oh, by the way, these are heroes of youth. These are not heroes of adults. These are heroes of youth. And then in the 1950s, heroes of youth included 33% from historical figures. That's a drastic drop from 78% in the 1900s. And then 57% were sports, radio, and movie stars, and that wasn't even on the radar in the 1900s. And then by 2001, 2% historical figures, and 86% sports, television, radio, and movie stars. What happened? Well, the rise of a celebrity culture, advertising, movies, television, social media, influencers. In fact, by the way, my son could have told you at the age of 5 the brand of shoe that every member of the Phoenix Suns wore at that time, from Charles Barkley on down. And that kind of goes back to this idea of advertising, right? In fact, Randall would say, what's the most common thing with all heroes today? He would say they're all selling something. Well, let's talk about the difference between a hero and an idol for a minute, because a hero possesses character. An idol possesses or focuses on popularity. A hero is admired because of their virtues. An idol is admired maybe because of their visibility. Now, for this next segment, I want you to consider the good news. The good news is that today things have shifted in a drastic way. In fact, a recent survey found this, that many teenagers today identify their role models as grandparents, aunts and uncles, coaches, teachers, religious leaders, friends. and, of course, parents. In fact, the majority of youth today identified someone they actually knew as a hero, which is super encouraging. Children still want connection, they want mentors, but they need heroes close to home. So let's talk for a minute now of why boys need heroes. Because you can't become what you can't see. You can't become what you can't conceptualize or visualize. Heroes can help boys imagine what kind of husband they want to become, what kind of father they want to be, what kind of disciple of Christ they want to become. And I remember as a young father living in Mesa, Arizona, in my mid-20s to my mid-30s, but being in the young men's program and serving with young men leaders who were in their 40s and 50s at the time. Most of their children were either in high school or at BYU. And I just looked up to these men. I don't want to single out any of one of them specifically. Each one of them had different traits and characteristics. But as I would stay after our Wednesday night activities later and talk to these men about raising teenagers and what do you do, and watching them, how they handled their sons and daughters, I just looked up to those men, and I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be the kind of dad that they were. I also noted my own father-in-law, who was just such a great example. Talk about a close-to-home hero. But my father-in-law was just the epitome of what I wanted to be, which was humble and meek, a great church leader and servant, someone who loved their family so much in such a significant way, had fun with their family, but did it all without any fanfare or any attention to himself. Years ago, President Spencer W. Kimball gave a message in General Conference called Boys Need Heroes Close By. And in that message, he quoted Walter McPeak, who said boys need lots of heroes like Lincoln and Washington, but they also need to have some heroes close by. They need to know some man of towering strength and basic integrity personally. They need to meet them on the street, to hike and camp with them, to see them in close to home, everyday, down-to-earth situations, to feel close enough to ask questions and to talk things over man to man, it says. Oh, what a great statement from President Kimball. I think of an awesome track coach in high school that just took such an interest in me and made all the difference in my life my senior year of high school when he saw me sitting on the bench on my high school baseball team and said, man, we can use you. We could use your help. And he turned out to be very influential in my life. My mission president, who a lot of people could say was an incredible hero, who loved the gospel, loved the scriptures, taught in powerful ways, stood as a pillar of strength, but also had great relationships, and he knew that he cared for you. Just one caring adult can change a life. In fact, research consistently shows that one significant adult relationship dramatically improves youth outcomes. And so who is that person, and who was that person for you? Parents, if you're listening, do your children and grandchildren know who some of your heroes were? One of the things I love that heroes can do, especially with boys, is that heroes can teach boys how to be men. Heroes can teach courage. They can teach responsibility. They can teach kindness. And by the way, that was one of the things that I was learning, and I'm just being very candid and open with you. But growing up outside of our faith, that when I went to church, a lot of the men who were religious, or maybe even overly religious, it was kind of creepy, to be honest with you. I wasn't comfortable with the way that they manifested their discipleship in some of these different faith traditions I was attending. But when I came to our church, what I learned is that you can still be a real man in every good sense of that word. And you could also be kind. You could also love people. You could even cry on occasion. But it wasn't weird. It was normal. I was talking to a good friend of mine named Dr. Ted Acey. Ted Acey is a psychologist in the Dallas area. I knew him well when we lived there, and we even wrote a book together. But he said this. He said, I think boys need heroes so that they can have models of successful and accomplished men who in many cases were not always accomplished. Many of these men had to overcome personal weaknesses and or adverse circumstances in order to achieve heights that placed them in the hero class. This helps boys see that not only that accomplishment can come through work and perseverance, but also that their heroes at one time may have been like themselves. For example, a hero could have started out as a young man struggling with feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt, or even difficult circumstances, yet despite those challenges, they overcame these obstacles and excelled in specific areas of their lives. Heroes also give young men a sense of security about their world that helps them feel calm and confident facing fears, uncertainties, and other turmoil in their lives. They know someone stronger and wiser will be helping and looking out for them until the time comes that they can develop the ability to manage things for themselves and assume the role of a hero for another. Of course, boys need men to provide examples to them of how to live, how to solve problems, how to influence others, and how to deal with adversity, and how to build up those around them. That's a great comment by Dr. Acey on the role that heroes can play with young men. And here's a thought of how closely we're watching. It's always amazing to me what people pick up and what they see and what they notice. And I bet if I interviewed my mission president, he would not even remember what I'm about to share with you. But we were watching General Conference, via a broadcast in a chapel on Mercer Island, Washington, when in the middle of that General Conference, all of a sudden the transmission just went dead and there was just no conference. And so everyone's just kind of sitting there. But immediately I watched as my mission president popped up out of his seat, went right up to the front of the building. Now, he's not the stake president. He's not the bishop. He's the mission president. But he just went up there and just started working on stuff, trying to fix that situation as quickly as he could. And then others kind of joined in. And eventually, after maybe 5 or 10 minutes, the transmission was restored. But the lesson I learned is I thought, wow, Mission President Hanks, I don't know if you know anything about technology, and maybe you do, but that was so cool that when there was a crisis, you were like the first person to stand up and go address it. And that was a cool thought for me, and that's one I've never, ever forgotten. And I think about that often, of being a first responder. And once again, a little thing, I'm sure my mission president never thought of it, but I was always watching him close and learning these lessons. Now perhaps we can talk about why boys need heroes. Former Secretary of Education, Dr. William J. Bennett, commented that fashioning men has never been easy, but today it seems particularly tough. Boys need heroes to embody the everlasting qualities of manhood: honor, duty, valor, integrity. Without such role models, boys will naturally choose perpetual childhood over the rigors of becoming a man. As many women, teachers, coaches, employers, and adults in authority can now quickly attest. With such a dearth of role models, the state of men in our country has plummeted in recent decades. And this is why there is such a need for wonderful, awesome role models for our young men today. So let me just share with you some things that I wrote in that book on the making of a man in our chapter on heroes, of why boys need heroes. Number one, heroes can provide an image or a vision of what a boy can ultimately become. Yeah, heroes can provide boys with tangible patterns that they can emulate during the developmental years, especially when their critical thinking skills are being formed. And man, in fact, I always think back, I could even look back to certain men in my neighborhood growing up, because I thought they were great examples of manhood, fatherhood, and citizenship. And I knew that one day I could become like one of those men. I wanted to be like those guys. Heroes can provide boys with examples to model their lives after. And if boys want to be successful, they need to model, or they need at least have a model or a plan or a template to follow, for sure. Number two, heroes can inspire boys to reach their goals and dreams. Now, as I mentioned, Freddie Patek inspired me to be a better baseball player. My high school track coach inspired me to run with guts and compete with the best. I loved him because he loved me. An English teacher in high school convinced me that I could write, even though I didn't believe that. Well, boys need heroes so that they can understand how to reach their potential. The stronger the relationship between a boy and a man he deems a hero, the more influence that hero will have on that boy. So if a father or a coach or a church leader has a strong relationship with a young man and invests time in him, then he'll have a far greater impact on that boy than any hero that appears in the local paper or plays for a professional sports team could ever have. By the way, heroes don't have to vanish when we become older. My heroes changed over time. Obviously, they did. From professional athletes to then I got into the mission field, and all of a sudden I wanted to be like President Spencer W. Kimball, who was the prophet at the time, who was just so humble and meek. When I listened to Thomas S. Monson speak in those days, I wished I could speak and teach like he did. There were even more seasoned missionaries in my mission that inspired me to work harder, and I found myself wanting to become like them. And it just goes on and on down the line, right? There have always been men in my wards and stakes, as I mentioned earlier, that have inspired me to want to be a better husband and father. Or men in my profession that I've wanted to be more like because of some of their skills and the way that they handle themselves. Heroes just help us reach our potential. But they can also encourage, advocate, and inspire young men to become more than they ever dreamed of becoming. Number 3, heroes can be mentors to teach boys how to be men, real men, and exemplary priesthood holders. Real heroes can help offset the onslaught of immoral messaging and the poor examples that can saturate a young man's life. In fact, no matter how wicked the world becomes, true heroes can teach boys to be good, to be righteous, to be clean, to be pure, to be kind, to be humble. And such heroes can help young men know that it's okay to be good, that it's actually awesome to be good. Such heroes practice Christ-like virtues when no one's looking, regardless of where the camera is. In fact, many modern heroes spend time visiting the sick in hospitals, writing letters to the discouraged, serving in homeless shelters, and giving their time to the downtrodden and to the disadvantaged. These heroes teach young men how to act and how to behave in different circumstances. Number 4, most heroes can teach boys how to overcome obstacles and how to do hard things. Being a hero probably isn't a cushy job, right? And most heroes are invited to do hard things and to do the right thing, even when it's not popular. Heroes are able to persevere through temptation and opposition. They face challenges head on, toe to toe. And they don't back down from anyone or any challenge. They hold on to their faith even when times get tough. Heroes can teach boys how to remain strong when there is strong sexual temptation, for example, or how to stand up for what's right when everyone else is following the crowd, or how to persevere when they don't feel well, or they're injured, or they're sick. Heroes can teach boys to move forward with faith and that God will be there, and that you can fight City Hall when you need to. Heroes can teach boys to take a stand, even when a certain position may not be popular. And some heroes can learn these lessons at a young age. Now, some of you may remember this story of Chai Johnson, a special needs student at Queen Creek High School near Mesa, Arizona. Chai was bullied and persecuted by fellow students at her high school. She was shoved, taunted, and even had garbage thrown on her. Now, Carson Jones, the high school quarterback, surrounded Chai along with some of his fellow teammates, Tucker Workman, Colton Moore, Curtis Jones, and Tyler Jones. Now, each of these young men were faithful Latter-day Saints and Aaronic priesthood holders. They invited Chai to eat lunch with them. They protected her. They walked her to class. They became her best friends. In fact, this posse of young men became known as Chai's Boys. And when the bullies who saw who Chai's new friends were, they didn't mess with her anymore. Now, these young men, I think, serve as great examples of what true heroes do. They're not afraid to do the right thing ever. These modern-day sons of Mosiah have taught men and boys to be bold and fearless, to stand for righteous causes, no matter how strong the persecution is. Number 5, heroes teach boys to make sacrifices. Now, society's fabricated heroes constantly tell us how amazing they are. They thump their chest, they celebrate the simplest accomplishments, like catching a ball. They point to themselves on the Jumbotron. They shout into the microphone telling us how amazing they are. Many of them believe their own hype, and they've drank in their own Kool-Aid, so to speak. But to me, These self-appointed heroes are not really heroes at all. What is it they've done? Except what they're paid millions of dollars to do. What sacrifices have they made? Have they dodged any bullets? Have they saved others from tragic circumstances? In my mind, a true hero would include the following: those who actually ran towards the explosions at the Boston Marathon to see how they could help. Men and women who serve our country in the military to protect us from evil people, doing things that most of us probably wouldn't be willing to do. Those men and women who work as police officers, EMTs, doctors, and others in helping professions, sometimes even risking their lives for our safety. How about those who teach us? Often they're men and women that we admire. Many of these individuals could have worked in other professions and even made more money, but they have such an interest in molding and shaping our youth. Church leaders and teachers who tirelessly serve and bless those around them. Most of the time, they serve for years in callings that they've never asked for but are willing to do. And they really don't get a lot of praise or kind words pointed their direction. Parents who sacrifice their own needs and interests so that their children can take lessons, get braces, play on teams, receive gifts for their birthdays, often compromising their own health, their own desires and dreams to bless their children. Indeed, true heroes work hard, they make sacrifices for others, they fight for great causes. Such heroes, they're not looking to receive pay for their daily routines or by doing what's expected of them. They just do it, right? In fact, one time the prophet Joseph F. Smith said this. He says, those things that we call extraordinary, remarkable, or unusual may make history, but they don't make real life. After all, he said, to do well those things which God ordained to be the common lot of all mankind is the truest greatness. To be a successful father or a successful mother is greater than to be a successful general or a successful statesman. The way that I think about it, good role models are just not optional for young men. I love that President Ezra Taft Benson once taught that boys are hero worshipers. They are great idealists, and they love to follow one whom they regard as their ideal, their pal, their friend, their champion. My recommendation is that one of the great heroes a boy should have is their own father. A father can be a close-to-home hero who can model righteousness for his boys. Dads can teach their sons by example how to work hard, how to respect women, how to overcome obstacles, how to keep covenants, how to be kind and respectful to others. Fathers can't force themselves as heroes on their boys, but hopefully that relationship will develop as young boys come to respect their fathers and their fathers take an interest in their lives. I think young boys watch their fathers closely. They want to walk like them, talk like them, and become like them. Many boys hope that they look like their dads. A child's first ideas about God often come from their father. Will he be strong, loving, protecting, or frightening, distant, or absent? What a humbling thought that our little sons will form impressions about God's love, God's power, God's provision from acts of love and power and provision as fathers. It's a humbling and mind-blowing responsibility for fathers to model for their sons what God the Eternal Father must be like. Of course, we're all going to fall short in that endeavor, but we can do our best. Our ultimate goal is to point our sons towards Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. They should become the ultimate heroes of our boys, along with other scriptural heroes, as well as modern apostles and prophets. If we can direct our son towards those great people, they'll take it from there. I know that they will. Now, I always like to say, have a hero, be a hero. And I want to be careful the way I say that because I don't want people to be trying out for hero worship or anything. And like I just mentioned, I don't think anyone can force their children to love us or to be their hero, right? I can't say to my sons and daughters or grandkids, hey guys, I should be your hero, okay? So pay close attention. But I think what we can do is to try to live a life that's admirable, to try to live a life that maybe our children would want to live, and to try to be an example at all times, to be interested in our children and grandchildren, to talk to them, reach out to them, to love them. And then maybe one day it may click for them and they may say, you know what, I think my dad or my grandfather is kind of a cool hero in a lot of ways. Anyway, it's a great responsibility and it's a great opportunity. But even if we can point our children to the right places and to the right people to look up to and admire, I think that's a significant thing that needs to happen today. So as I say LDS, let's do something. What's on my mind today is, number one, to ask our children a question. Who are your heroes, or who's the hero to you, and how come? And then if there's an opportunity, to try to point them in a direction where there are scriptural heroes. There are heroes from our church history. There are heroes from our own church leaders right now. But there's also heroes in our neighborhoods. And as we said earlier, at our own kitchen table. And to have our children be aware of those type of heroes can make all the difference. Ultimately, our heroes could be and should be, I think, Jesus Christ and our Father in heaven. Maybe some discussion questions at home as well, like these. Who was your hero growing up? Maybe that's something you could share with your children. Or what made that person influential to you? Another great question. Or to ask your children who their heroes are today, like I mentioned, and what qualities in those heroes do they admire? How can we become heroes close to home? Think about that question for a minute. And how can we introduce our children to spiritual heroes? And what kind of hero does our world need right now? I love this idea that most heroes never become famous. They never win championships. They never appear on television. They never trend on social media. But every day they influence our lives. A father kneeling at a child's bed, a grandmother sharing her testimony, a teacher who refuses to give up on a struggling student, a coach who teaches character before competition, a bishop who quietly ministers, a neighbor who notices. Those are the heroes who shape the future, and boys are watching, and I'm sure girls are too. The question isn't whether they will have heroes or not. The question is whether those heroes they choose will help them become the men of God that we hope and intend them to be. Well, everyone, thanks for being with me today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful week. I look forward to being with you next time. Keep smiling, everyone.